Have you ever prayed for something and then once you got it, you started to feel a little disappointed, like it wasn't what you actually wanted? If so, stay tuned and I will teach you what to do when your blessing doesn't come like you expected. What is going on, everyone? We are back for another episode of Prospering with Christ. I hope you had a wonderful week last week, and I hope that this week will be just as amazing to you as well. So, for today's episode, we are discussing the topic of what to do when your blessing does not come like you expected. I honestly wanted to talk about this today because this has been something that God has really been ministering to me lately on a lot of different occasions. And the first occasion actually has to deal with this podcast. So, for those who don't know, I do this podcast completely by myself. So, everything from recording, editing, social media, all the behind the scenes stuff, I do manually by myself. And so, I was starting to get to a point where it was really tiring and it was really draining, like playing all the parts and having to like manually do everything myself. So I started praying to God and I basically was just telling him like I was kind of tired and drained from all like manually doing everything, and I wanted to be able to put some things on like autopilot where it was automatically doing it itself, because it was getting to a point where like if I was at like a cookout and I needed to post on social media, I would have to manually stop what I'm doing at this cookout and post for the podcast on social media. Like I just had to manually do everything. And so God blessed me and he started opening some doors where I was learning some ways to just get things up and running without me manually doing it. So I was doing that for like a couple months, and then I went back to him and I was like, God, I don't feel like I'm doing enough. I feel like I'm just like not putting in much effort when it comes to my podcast. I feel like I'm not working hard enough. Like, I feel like I'm not spending a lot of time on it. And I was just coming to him about this and complaining to him about this. And so one day he spoke to me when I was in my prayer time and he was like, Kiana, you prayed to be here. You prayed to get to a place where you were not manually doing everything for your podcast. You're complaining to me about a place that you literally prayed to be. So when he said this to me, I was just like, oh, not you checking me. Like, you right. I did pray to be here. And I thought like I was going to learn my lesson. I was just going to be like, okay, maybe I should be a little bit more specific about what I'm praying for. But that didn't happen because this happened to me again a couple weeks ago. So I pray over a lot of different things. And one of the things that I pray about is marriage and family. I always talk about how I want to be as like a wife and as a mother. I talk about what characteristics I want in a husband. I talk about how, I want my children to be, like the characteristics that I want them to have. And so I would pray these things over like family and marriage like every week, right? So I wound up meeting a guy. I met a guy back in February and we've been talking and courting each other. And he's like he's really amazing. But there was one thing that I used to complain about to God with him. And I was just like, every time we get into like disagreements, he just like leaves. Like he just be like, okay, I'm gonna take some time for myself and I'm gonna just, go away and I'll come back later or I'll come back tomorrow. And so I was praying to God about this and I'm complaining and I'm just like, God, I don't like that. Like I want to be able to like talk and communicate right there on the moment, like right there in the moment. Like I don't want to separate and then come back together. So when I'm praying this to God, he has me go and open my prayer journal. And my prayer journal is where I wrote down all the characteristics that I am looking for in me, children, husband, all of that. So I'm looking at the characteristics that I wrote down under a husband. And one of the characteristics that I wrote was he walks away during arguments. So I'm looking at it and I'm just like, I have this dumb look on my face. And God speaks to me again. And he's like, Kiana, you prayed to have a husband that will walk away during an argument. So why are you complaining that you're talking to a guy and he is walking away every time that y'all have an argument? So as I'm having these conversations with God, I started to wonder how many people are like me. Like, how many people pray for things and then what we're praying for isn't exactly what we want? It's like we prayed to be here, but then when we get it, we don't want it or we don't like it. And some of us even complain to God where we're questioning him, like, why are we going through this? Why are we experiencing this? Why is this happening? And we even put the blame on God. God, why would you bring this person to me? God, why are you allowing this situation to happen to me? And sometimes God is saying, this not me. This is you. You prayed for the wrong thing. You weren't clear and you didn't understand what that blessing looked like. You didn't understand for you to actually have that blessing, what that will look like, and if that was something that you genuinely wanted. And sometimes the problem isn't that God just wants us to go through this, because, every time we experience something that we don't like, we always like to say, everything happens for a reason. God wanted us to go through this. God has a purpose in this. But no, sometimes we are responsible for why we go through things. And sometimes our responsibility and our accountability on that is that we were not clear enough of what we wanted, or we didn't actually understand what we wanted. So we spent so much time praying and praying and praying over something. And now that we got it, we realize this isn't what I wanted. This isn't the blessing that I expected to come to me. And if I'm being honest, sometimes God does minister things to me and I don't share it with you guys on the podcast, and I don't really do podcast episodes about that topic. But this one, God has really been calling me and telling me, like, Kiana, yes, I'm sharing this with you, but I need you to take this message and I need you to share it with the people on your podcast. And the reason why is because some people, they realize that what they're praying for isn't what exactly they wanted. And instead of coming to me and praying for something else and realizing like what exactly it is that they want and coming to me and giving that to me in prayer, they've been settling here. They've been settling in this blessing because they feel guilty for not being happy here. And honestly, can we blame you? Because you spend all of this time praying and praying and praying to God for this. You've been fighting for this. You've been sacrificing for this. You went through the worst of the worst storms to get here, just to receive the blessing and not be satisfied. You feel guilty. You feel ashamed to say, I'm not happy with this. You feel ashamed to say, I'm not satisfied with this. And if you were to go to somebody who probably seen your journey, they probably seen how hard you fought. They probably was, say, a prayer warrior with you, and they stood in agreement with you for this blessing. If you were to go to somebody and say, I'm not really happy about this blessing, I don't really like this blessing, they will call you ungrateful. They will say, oh, wow, you're just a horrible person. Like, God really came through for you and you're still not satisfied. Don't you know how many people who wish that they were where you are? Don't you know how many people wish that they had the blessing that God gave you, and you over here complaining? You're over here not happy. You're over here unsatisfied. They will make you feel guilty. And so deep down inside, you feel ashamed for not being happy with what God brought you. And you've been making the decision to just settle here. Instead of acknowledging the fact that I'm not satisfied, instead of acknowledging the fact that I don't like the blessing, I'm just going to settle with it because I don't want to seem ungrateful. But what you don't realize is God is the one who's exposing your unhappiness to you. He's the one who's exposing the parts of the blessing that you don't like. And it's not because he wants to condemn you, but it's because God is not the God of settling. God is not the God of bare minimum. God is the God who wants you to actually have the things that you desire. God is the one who's exposing the parts of the blessing that you don't like, because he wants you to bring those parts to him so that he can bring you what exactly it is that you want. It is not ungrateful, it is not rude, and it is not selfish for you to not be happy here. And sometimes God wants us to bring these things that he's exposing to us to him, because he understands that we cannot fully be purposeful in this blessing. Everything that God does is for a purpose. Everything that God gives us is for a purpose. Even if that purpose is just a testimony, even if it's going to be something where somebody sees you receive that blessing and it brings honor to his name because it sparks their faith, everything is for a purpose. And God understands that if this blessing isn't exactly what you want, and this blessing is not satisfying you, you can't fully be purposeful. How can you give a testimony of something that you don't like? How can you call people to trust God, to do abundant things for them, if you don't feel like he's done abundant things for you, because you're not satisfied? You feel like you're settling. You feel like this is the bare minimum. You feel like you're just accepting something. God understands that you cannot fully be purposeful in something that you're not satisfied in. God understands that you cannot fully be purposeful in something that you don't like. God understands that accepting something that you did not want is not going to ignite your faith. It's going to kill it. See, when you pray for the wrong things, it puts you in a mentality of thinking that God is not the big miracle worker that everybody says he is. It makes you think that God is the God of bare minimum, that God is the type of God that will send you something less than what you desire. And a lot of the times you may be wondering, well, why would you feel that way? It's because we don't realize that we are the ones who prayed for this. We don't realize that we are the ones that brought this. We had faith for this. We stepped out and worked for this. We don't realize that it was our doing and not God's. We think we prayed for something and God just brought us something that was less than what we wanted. We don't realize that we told God that this is what we wanted. Let's go back to my story, right? Both of them. In the first story, I did not realize that I told God I wanted my podcast to be less stressful. I wanted some things to be on autopilot where it was automatically working behind the scenes and I didn't have to manually do it myself. When I met the guy who was courting me, I didn't realize that I said I wanted my husband to walk away during arguments. So when we would get into these heated discussions and I like to express my feelings and I like to tell you on the spot and I like to work things out immediately, and he was like, no, I'm going to take some time for myself. I'm going to come back and talk to you tomorrow. I didn't realize that's what I wanted. So when I was going to God and I'm complaining, I'm not complaining to him saying, God, you did this. God, I don't like what you did, but I'm just venting my frustrations to him about the situations. He's coming to me and he's like, Kiana, you are the one who said you wanted it. You are the one who was praying for this. He was revealing to me that this was my doing, that he was just honoring something that I said that I wanted. But a lot of people are like me, where they don't realize that. So they start turning it on God. Well, God is just a bare minimum God. God doesn't fulfill our needs. God doesn't bring us our heart desires. God can't do this. God requires us to settle. We start giving God the responsibility of our doing. God understands the negative effects of accepting a blessing that you do not want. So don't feel guilty for not being happy here. Take that unhappiness to God, because in my situations, not only did God expose to me that I prayed for it, he exposed to me what I actually wanted. Some of it is personal, so I'm not going to share it, but there were things that was causing this unsatisfaction with me. The problem wasn't that I just don't like the fact that my podcast is on autopilot. There were other things that were lacking in my podcast that was causing me to have those feelings. So God not only exposed to me that I was the one who prayed for this, he also exposed to me the things that are lacking that's causing me to feel those emotions. So now I can say, God, I want my podcast to be on autopilot, but I also want this to happen. I also want this to happen. I also want to see this working in my podcast. I also want to see this taking off in my podcast. He was exposing to me the things that are causing me to be unsatisfied so that I can bring it back to him and pray over those things to get what I actually desire. God is not asking you to settle. God is not calling you ungrateful. God is very patient with us. God is very understanding. God knows that we don't have all of the wisdom. It's hard for us to actually point out what we want in something that we've never experienced. God understands that sometimes we have to get a little bit of experience in that area to realize, no, that's not actually something that I want. And he's patient with us. He's understanding. He's not condemning us. And I understand why so many people will feel that way. Because if we were to take this to the church, if we were to take these emotions to Christian people, a lot of them would condemn us. A lot of them would be the ones calling us ungrateful. And we think that because people feel that way, God is going to feel that way. But God is saying, I am the one who is exposing the unsatisfaction to you. I am the one who is pointing out the things that you don't like about the blessing. I am the one who is pointing out the things that you wish were there in the blessing, because I want you to bring those things back to me so that I can give you what you actually want, and I can give you what you actually are praying for. Are you enjoying this episode so far? Is this episode teaching you what to do when you receive a blessing that is different from what you expected? If so, I want you to do me two favors. Favor number one, I want you to leave a review. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this episode. Leave an honest review and let me and others know how you are enjoying the show. And favor number two, if you know anyone who feels unsatisfied with a blessing that they received from God, I want you to send this episode to them. Let this episode motivate and encourage them the same way that it is motivating and encouraging you. Now let's get back to the show. Before I move on to the next topic, I had another thought that I want to share with you. Don't let you being unsatisfied with this blessing question your discernment. Because for a lot of us, when we get into a place where we receive a blessing from God and we're not happy with it or we're not satisfied with it, we automatically tend to think, well, maybe this blessing didn't come from God. Maybe this blessing came from the devil. Maybe this blessing was a curse that the devil dressed up to look like a blessing. And then we start to think about our journey to getting that blessing. We start to think about the revelations that we got from God. We start to think about the steps that we got from God. We start to think about the instructions that God was giving us. And we start to question, was that God? Because God isn't going to lead us to something that the devil is sending, but it sounded like God. So how did God bring us to something that was dressed up and designed by the devil? We start to allow our unsatisfaction to make us question our discernment, where we're questioning, maybe we don't hear God the way that we thought we did. Maybe God doesn't speak to us the way that we thought he did. We automatically think things are either God or it's the devil. And so when it ain't looking picture perfect, because we think everything that comes from God is perfect, when it's not looking perfect, when we're not happy, when we're not satisfied, we automatically assume that it's the devil. But little do we know, that's what the devil wants. The devil wants to expose the ugly parts of this blessing that we don't like to us, to make us think that it came from him, question our discernment with God, and pull us away from God. And we have to stop falling into that trap. We have to understand there's more than just God and the devil, there's us. And sometimes we play a part in the outcomes that we see, in the blessings that we see, in the situations that we see. But I want to help you avoid birthing the wrong blessing. And the first way for you to do that is you have to make sure that you are not settling in your prayer. See, there's a difference in settling in the blessing and settling in the prayer. Settling in the blessing means you already received it. You feel like it's something that you don't like, but you feel guilty saying that, so you just accept it anyway. Settling in the prayer may look like you don't have a lot of faith. There's something that you actually want, but you don't truly trust that God can do that for you. So you settle for something that doesn't make you afraid. You start praying for something that makes you feel comfortable. It doesn't cause fear to arise every time you say it. It doesn't make you uncomfortable to speak it out loud or to say it to other people. I want to give you an example so this is better for you to understand. So let's say that your true desire is to purchase a brand new Mercedes Benz. The Mercedes that you want normally costs around, let's say, $90,000. You want it brand new and you want to pay in cash. That scares you because, number one, you have never been able to afford a car that costs that much. You have never been able to drop cash on a car. You have never been able to buy a brand new car. It scares you so much that you don't even feel comfortable saying it. If you were to go to your family member, your friends, your neighbors, and you were to tell them this was something that you were seeking God over, they would call you crazy. They would be like, that ain't possible. Look where you live. Look where you work. You don't have money like that. Like, how in the world is that going to happen? It makes you uncomfortable to say it out loud. So what you start doing is you start praying to God for a Kia, a used Kia. It's 2 years old. It has 50,000 miles. It's a lot cheaper, and you're praying to get a loan. So you're settling in your prayer. So when God sends you that Kia, don't expect to be happy because that's not what you wanted. Deep down inside, you wanted the Mercedes. And if you're the type of person who settles in your prayer, I want you to ask yourself this question. If God can send you the Kia, why can't he send you the Mercedes? If God can send you what you're settling for, why can't he send you what you actually desire? It takes the same amount of faith to get both. Why can't you just pray for what you actually want? To avoid getting a blessing that you don't actually want, you have to make sure that your prayer and the things that you're telling God you desire are what you actually desire. The next thing that I want you to do is I want you to think about what you have been praying to God for. And I want you to try to envision yourself with it. Try to envision yourself living it out and pay attention to the parts of that vision that makes you happy and pay attention to the parts of that vision that makes you sad. So let's say that you're praying over marriage, right? Let's say you are envisioning yourself with a husband or you're envisioning yourself with a wife. What part of your spouse will make you happy? Maybe it's going on romantic getaways. Maybe it's having date nights. Maybe it's them packing your lunch. Maybe it's them buying you a gift. And then what parts will make you not so happy? Maybe it's if they don't spend much time with you. Maybe if they spend all day working and they don't really talk to you. Pay attention to the parts of the vision that will make you smile and pay attention to the parts that makes you a little sad or a little disappointed or you're just like, I don't know how I would feel if that part came true. The parts that's making you disappointed, you want to pray the opposite of that. So you go to God and you say, I don't want this in my blessing. I don't want to experience it. I want to experience these parts that's making me happy. I don't want to experience these parts that's bringing out negative emotions in me. And the last thing that I want you to do is I want you to be as specific as possible when you are praying. Don't be vague. Being vague is basically telling God, you can send me whatever. It just has to meet these bare minimum requirements. So if you go to God and you say, God, I just want a car. God, I just want a marriage. But you're not specific about what type of car do you want to do you want an SUV? Do you want a truck? Do you want an actual car? What color? What interior color? What features? Do you want Bluetooth? Do you want a screen? Do you want leather seats? Do you want cloth seats? Like, you're not being specific. You're just telling God, I want a car. So when he sends you, the bare minimum, which is a car, you're not happy. If you go to God and you say, God, I just want to be married, but you're not talking about the type of characteristics you want. You're not talking about what you want your husband to look like. Do you want him? What race do you want him to be? How tall do you want him to be? How does he dress? Does he dress like a thug on the streets? Does he carry himself nice? Does he dress casual? Does he dress in suits like he's a businessman? Like, what exactly do you want? Don't be vague in your prayers. When you pray vague prayers, you're going to get vague results. And if you are already in a blessing where you feel unsatisfied, because all of the tips that I just gave you was for if you're praying for something, this is how you avoid getting something that you don't like. But if you already received a blessing and you feel unsatisfied in it, in order to right the wrong, all you have to do is, number one, you want to stop blaming God for the result that you reaped. And you want to take accountability. You want to ask yourself, did I pray for this? Go back to your prayer journal. Go back to your vision board. Go back to the documents. This is why God say write the vision, because he wants us to see what exactly we prayed for. And we can go back to it to see, yes, God did answer it the way that I said it, right? So you want to take accountability for praying for this and not realizing that it was something that you didn't want. Then you want to ask God to expose the parts about this blessing that you don't like. Maybe there are some parts that you like, but there's other parts that you don't like. With my podcast, yes, there's parts that I like. There's actually parts about my podcast being like automatic in some ways that I genuinely do like, but there was other parts that were lacking that was causing me to feel unsatisfied. With the guy that is courting me, there's a lot of parts of him that I like, but there's this one part about him walking away during arguments that was very irritating to me. And there's for a specific reason that I'm not going to get into, but God exposed that reason to me. So you have to ask God, expose to me the parts of this that I don't like and why I don't like it. Once he exposes it to you, Then you want to take it back to him in prayer and pray for him to work on these areas. Once you start doing that, you're going to start noticing either God is going to bless you with something else, or God is going to start working things out in this blessing for you. But at the end of the day, don't settle in your blessing because you feel guilty about praying for it or you feel like you're being ungrateful. God wants to give you exactly what you desire, and it's because He understands that you cannot fully be purposeful if you are not satisfied where you are or if you are in the wrong spot. And He realizes that you settling in this blessing is not going to ignite your faith, it's going to kill it. To avoid birthing the wrong blessing, you want to make sure that you're not settling in your prayer, that the things that you're telling God you want is what you actually desire, and you're not dimming it down to your comfortability level. You want to try to envision yourself with the blessing that you are praying to God for, and pay attention to the parts of that blessing in your vision that is making you happy and the parts that's kind of disappointing you. The parts that's disappointing you, you want to take it back to God and you want to say, hey, God, I don't like this. I don't want this in my blessing. This is something that I don't want to experience. And you also want to make sure that you are being as specific as possible. Remember, vague prayers are going to bring you vague results. And if you're in a situation where you already received a blessing and it is not what you expected it to be, the first thing that you have to do is you have to take accountability for the role that you played. You want to ask God to expose the parts of this blessing that you don't like and why you don't like it. And you want to take those parts back to God and pray over them for Him to either give you a new blessing or redirect you in this blessing so you can actually enjoy it. So my action step for you this week is I want you to envision yourself with the blessing that you are currently praying to God over. I want you to pay attention to the parts of it that you like and write them down, and pay attention to the parts of it that's kind of like disappointing you and take those to God and tell Him that this is not something that you want. But that is all that I have for you today. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe so that you get a notification every time a new episode is released. Also, leave a review and let me and others know how you enjoyed the show. And if you want to stay connected, make sure that you follow me on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram at Prospering with Christ. But that's all I have for you today, and I will see you next week.